You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy with the wickets we're on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20GB daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 64 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm your host, Behram and Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. And the title of this particular Footmarks podcast is The T20I Legacy of King Kohli. So it's quite self-explanatory. And Jarrod, Kohli won the ODI World Cup in 2011 as a 22-year-old, and then he won the Champions Trophy in 2013 as a 24-year-old. But he wasn't India's main man in either of those campaigns, even though he had some very important knocks here and there. Come to some tournaments where he was the main man, player of the tournament in both the 2014 and 2016 editions of the T20 World Cup. But of course, India lost to eventual champions Sri Lanka and the West Indies in the final and semi-final respectively. Also in 2016, Kohli scored 973 runs in an IPL season, but RCB lost that final and he missed out on an elusive IPL title. He was also India's highest run scorer in the 2022 T20 World Cup campaign, which of course ended with India being smashed by England in Adelaide in the semi-final. And taking all of this into context, him actually lifting the T20 World Cup in Barbados in what was his final T20I game for India was a legacy-defining moment.
Yeah, I think I can't remember if it was Varun or Shahan, but one of them sort of said, we need to do a piece on Virat's legacy. We need to do a piece on Rohit's legacy when it comes to specifically T20 cricket.
And they've been after our case to do a Footmarks on this as well, so they'll be happy that it's finally out.
And when I said, look, Rohit's fine and we'll get to it one day. But Virat is the important player, I think, in this, because I think he was like one of the young stars of the IPL when it started.
Yeah.
He's been such a famous player all the way through. And then 2014 and 2016 come up and, and that IPL season you're talking about where he almost breaks 1,000 runs. All these sorts of things he's done. And he's been iconic for being the young player who is the future. And then he's been iconic as being the player who never won anything. And then he's been iconic as the player who maybe didn't quite move with the times correctly. He's a really interesting player. And, there was that comment recently about, do you want to be the Mitali Raj of the Australian women's team that was said to one of the players. And, Kohli has flirted with that kind of Mitali Raj thing as well. And then out of that, he then has maybe his worst T20 World Cup, right? And yet within that plays the one innings that also could have lost them the game, the Schrodinger's Kohli that we talked about before. He's just kind of always in the conversation when it comes to T20. And, if you take away the sort of Kohli lovers and Kohli haters, because those people are a bit nuts, that Rohit Kohli nonsense. Yeah. But if you just look at it from normal cricket fans, he is a really confusing player in T20 cricket. And he is such an integral person to the history of specifically international T20 cricket, I would argue, and the IPL, which is the other biggest thing.
Yeah, we'll come to make those cases as we progress in this podcast. But it's interesting how you brought up India's most recent T20 World Cup triumph and how Kohli had his worst tournament ever, scored 75 runs all tournament across 7 games, if I'm not wrong, only to go on to score 76 in the final in an innings which could have been either bashed like crazy or celebrated forever. It was the latter because the result was such. India had won, so people did go on to celebrate it. But that's where you coined the term Schrodinger's Kohli. And it is paradoxical in every single way, much like his T20 career.
Yeah, and I remember there was one person on Twitter, and it wasn't an Indian fan either. It was, I think it was an Australian, who was really upset. He goes, no one would ever bash Kohli for this innings. And I had to say, well, you should spend more time on the internet, or maybe your life is great because you don't spend more time on the internet. Yeah. But the truth is that is where it was. And you can make I know Kartikeya, he, has been very, very full on with his questions about Virat Kohli, the T20 player, over the years. But you could also make a claim that there aren't many players who have the ability to consistently make the runs that he has. No one wants to bowl to him. No one wants him out in the middle. No one wants to set Kohli batting out there in case he goes off at the end. All these sorts of things. All these things are true. He is at once one of the most important people in T20 cricket, and also not the most straightforward legend in T20 cricket in the way that that his teammate AB de Villiers is.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd like to talk about whilst we're on this subject is that I'm chuffed for him that Kohli got to retire on a high and finally won that elusive trophy after a 11-year drought of ICC trophies that India had experienced. And in sport, Jarrod, we often measure success by the number of trophies a player has won, but cricket is a team game. 11 people play it for a single side at one time, so it is perhaps an unfair metric, trophies that is, at times, because one player cannot do everything. And Kohli has been often scapegoated in the past for failed campaigns, particularly by the Indian media. So this is a massive weight off his shoulders.
Yeah, look, we see this is sort of a byproduct of American sport, right? Of the whole, if you don't win the trophy, then you're no longer a great player anymore. And like in basketball, it kind of makes a bit more sense because there's only 5 people on the court and you are 20% of the players on the court and you are 30% of probably the offense. Right? So it makes a lot more sense. In cricket, I think openers make around 20% of the runs of a team. It's very rare to make 30% of your team's runs over. You might do it in a year, but you're not going to do it consistently all that often. Yeah. And that's just batting, right?
Yeah.
You've got to focus in on the other side of the ball as well. So generally, a great batter is probably going to be around 12.5 to 15% of the impact that you have on a game, right? And yet, when they don't win a title, that gets blamed them. Now, I think there are some genuine question marks about Virat Kohli and his relationship with RCB. I don't always think that's a Virat Kohli issue. I think sometimes it's them just doing what they think he wants rather than actually even doing what he wants or getting him to justify what he wants, right? I think from an Indian perspective, that hasn't quite been the same kind of situation. I think the entire Indian culture cricket culture, I should say, wanted them to play the way that they did. It just wasn't the right way, and that's why they didn't get over the line, and then they changed.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, they got into enough finals to accidentally win one, right?
Yeah.
And that would have changed his legacy, despite the fact, if Heinrich Klaasen doesn't go out to that wide one off, was it Hardik?
Yes, it was Pandya.
Yeah, if he edges that past the keeper, does that make Virat Kohli a worse player than he is now? No, of course it doesn't, right?
Absolutely not.
He's exactly the same level of player, but Heinrich Klaasen edges the ball, it goes for 4, next ball Heinrich Klaasen's like, well, I'm just going to smack this for 6 and end this game now so I don't have to worry about Jasper. And it's over, right? Why would Virat Kohli be any worse as a cricketer? But that is how we've been trained to think, sadly.
Yeah. I do agree with you, but of course a trophy helps with cementing a legacy. Yeah. And there was a bit of Sangakkara 2014 and Kohli 2024, wasn't it? Like
Definitely.
Both steadied the ship in a final and were the main run scorers or accumulators. And that happened to be both of their last ever T20 international games for their respective countries. And after having top scored in losing causes over the years in past ICC knockout games, both found themselves in that position and both went on to break that trophy drought. And to add, Kohli scored 75 in 7 innings, whereas Sangha scored 19 runs in 4 innings prior to the final. So the parallels are limitless. They're infinite.
Yeah. and again, that was a team that was incredible who should have won a title before and didn't. I think in their case, rather than it being an issue of Sri Lankan cricket, it was more that they just kept running into fantastic sides and couldn't get over the line in the way that they probably should have, looking back on it. And so then there was the explosion of that, but they didn't have that kind of the Indian pressure of it, right? I mean, cricket is all consuming in Sri Lanka. Don't get me wrong, but 25 million people is not 1.4 billion, right?
True.
I mean, I'd have to put it in a graphic to make sure, but I'm pretty sure those are very different. And so it is very different. But yes, I think it needed that. I think the difference is that Kumar, let's take Kumar specifically. I think he would have been remembered as a legend anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with Virat, India have had so many great cricketers before, he might have just got subsumed. And also, the other thing is, I don't think Gavaskar's batting is respected as much as it should be, right? And that's because Sachin comes right after him. Who knows who's going to come straight after Virat?
Yeah.
Chances are they're going to have another great player. And Sanu Gavaskar, Alan Border, Greg Chappell, so a lot of very good players from very good teams who straight afterwards had someone else, and then you forget about them, right? We see that a lot, and because of that, it's that's the legacy thing that you're talking about, and that's why it's important.
Yeah. And it was so eerie, that picture, Virat and Rohit with the Indian flags and the T20 World Cup trophy, reminded everyone pretty much of Sangha and Mahela with the T20 World Cup trophy when Sri Lanka won it in 2014, and they were also at the twilights of their careers. And coming to the IPL for a bit, right? We obviously speak of Virat's T20 legacy, and I know this podcast is specifically about his T20I legacy, but when you talk about the format holistically, the IPL is bound to come up. He hasn't won it. And whilst we both agree that him not winning it ever should not, hamper or change his legacy as a T20 bat, do you think it bothers him on a personal level? Because AB apparently said when he retired that it doesn't bother him anymore. He's over it. But what about Virat? They are close mates.
It'd be interesting. That's a really interesting one. Look, as someone who very briefly was involved with RCB and was very closely involved with them for a slightly longer period, there is no doubt in my mind that Virat plays a part in how that team is constructed and how they play their cricket. Right? He's not just a player. Even whether he's captain or not, he's not just a player. And it's a bit like, in the NBA when LeBron James went to LA and he started telling the ownership and the management who to hire, and they would make decisions based on what LeBron James said, and then it would fall apart, right? LeBron James can't suddenly put his hands up then and go, well, management made that decision. It's like, yeah, they made that decision because you wanted Russell Westbrook. It was a terrible decision. You got rid of a bunch of young talent. You didn't make your team any better. He was the wrong player and it didn't work. And you have to own that. And Virat was probably never quite got to that level of LeBron. But KL Rahul leaving when he did, which was a really interesting time to leave, I think was in part because of the connection of maybe wanting to bat the same position or something to do with the falling out. I don't think KL Rahul left because RCB didn't think he was talented, because he just had one of the greatest seasons in IPL history at that point, right? And he was young and he can keep and all these sorts of different things. They ended up one year with Corey Anderson bowling at the death. They never have good bowling lineups. They always overinvest in batting.
They had a spinner who they just let go. Yeah.
So at a certain point, where does Virat Kohli get the blame for that? And he probably gets the blame for it in the wrong ways. Because it's just like, you don't win a title, you don't win a title. But is he he's the most tenured person who's a decision maker in that side of a team that always makes poor decisions, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with his batting.
But interestingly enough, there is a stark difference, Jarrod, in Kohli's true numbers when you compare his IPL record to his record in T20 internationals.
And this is interesting, yeah.
Yeah, he has a true average of 11 in the IPL, whereas in an Indian shirt, when he's playing T20Is, he has a true average of 25. Compare his true strike rates in the IPL, he has a true strike rate of 2. In an Indian jersey, he has a true strike rate of 11. Now, through or via these numbers, surely we can conclude that Virat Kohli was a different beast altogether in the shortest format when he was playing for India.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really fascinating from an analyst's point of view, because a lot of this is just down to the fact that the IPL is a very fast-scoring league, and he's not consistently been a fast-scoring player, whereas conversely, international cricket is a slower scoring, and especially when he plays World Cups and everything, it's much slower scoring. And so then you've also got Roll. Does he feel more confident in the Indian side because he has Akshar and Jadeja and Hardik and whoever, people, even Shardul, Ashwin back in the old days, making the batting lineup longer, and he doesn't have that domestically. I think all these things play a part. But there is no doubt that he has been a much more impactful batter. And this isn't like a fluke thing like when Dawood Malan's career was a bit like that, or, we're talking about someone who's played a ton of international T20 cricket and a ton of IPL cricket. And we could tell he is a much more effective player internationally than he is domestically. And maybe he's also got, maybe that is something, I know didn't he complain about the stats people last year, despite the fact he then started following exactly what everyone had told him to do.
It was this year, actually, when he took down spinners in the IPL, he literally, clapped back saying that, I hear a lot of people saying that Kohli, I can't hit spin in the middle overs. Well, here you have it.
Yeah. I mean, no one would have ever said that if he was hitting spin in the middle overs, right? So I do think there are issues with the way he's played as an RCB player at times, but I also think that it's been a bad team, and he's probably reacted a little bit to that. Just from as an outsider perspective, I think I'd enjoy my batting a lot more if I was playing as a batter in the Indian team than I would be in RCB.
And there's a bit of the Evan Gulbis effect over here as well, right? Because RCB always stack up their top order and then they don't have that same kind of depth. Whereas in the Indian team, you've got your Hardiks, Jadejas, and there are other all-rounders who frequently show up in your Dubes and what was his name? Shardul Thakur. There's so many of those guys.
Ashwin, that's what we were talking about before, weren't we?
Akshar Patel.
They've had all of those players. So I do think that's an impact as well.
Yeah, there's more security, and which allows Kohli to bring out his best and play with more freedom. And we've seen that he can also go into his shell when things get tough. But before we come to that, we will. I want to talk about Kohli the chaser, because a huge part of Virat Kohli's legacy is his ability to chase down totals. Batting second, he has a true average of 40 in T20Is and 12 in the IPL, whereas his true strike rate chasing is 18 in an Indian shirt in T20Is and 6 for RCB. Now, those are ridiculous numbers, and he might just be the greatest chaser of all time in this format specifically. I know ODI cricket is another ball game altogether, and he's great over there as well. But strictly T20s, he's been fantastic.
Yeah, I think it suits the way he likes to play. He doesn't have to worry at all about if he's batting too fast or if he's batting too slow. Clearly, he's one of those guys where the equation brings out the best in his batting. And, we've seen those sorts of players before, and he's the epitome of that. And you think of most of the questions of Virat Kohli to player are really questions about how he plays in the first innings. No one really has these same kind of issues with him in the second innings, and that's because, he wins a lot of games. And also, it's not, when you're an opener and you do that, and I remember Chris Gayle had a really good record, and not lopsided first innings, second innings, but he had a really good record of playing in a lot of wins as an opener. But when Chris Gayle would win a game as an opener, he would break it open so much that it wouldn't even look like it was a close contest, right? Whereas he had snapped the head off it. Whereas the way that Kohli plays, he quite often takes the games deep. And so he gets the fact that he's batted all the way through the innings and that it's close. So he's a clutch player, he's a great chaser, and he's the best player on the field. And, so he gets sort of 3 ticks every time he does that, and he does it a lot. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
He's like the antithesis of Steve Smith, who prefers an open canvas, whereas Virat Kohli likes to have the math in front of him so that he can pace his chase accordingly. And he's spoken of chasing several times, right? That he sees it as an opportunity as opposed to, a precious situation. And also...
And I just on that, I think traditionally cricket, and we might see a whole generation of people like Kohli now, probably since Bevan, we started to get more and more of those players. We are conditioned as cricketers to think batting in the second innings or the fourth innings or however you look at it is harder than the first innings. Scoreboard pressure, all that sort of stuff. We now kind of are getting beyond that, right? We are thinking very differently about cricket and the future generation. And I always thought that was a mistake. I always thought that in cricket, we made too big a deal of the toss and whether we were batting first or batting second. And now we're starting to see a whole generations of cricketers coming through going, oh, we'll chase anything.
Yeah. Also, I mean, as a kid, he's mentioned this, that when he used to watch India play games of cricket and they would fail chasing totals, right? They would fall short. He used to visualize, getting India over the line in those chases. And what I see over there is manifestation. And I'm big on manifestation. So I think this has a role to play as well.
Yeah, I do. I don't even see it as manifestation, although I know what you mean. I almost see it as... I forget the phrase, but there's a sports psychology phrase of where you go out and you think about how you're going to do the thing that you're going to do. So once you have kind of already played it out in your head, that sort of visualization, isn't it? I think Matthew Hayden used to do it. He'd go out in the wicket and be like, okay, this is what the ground looks like. And I'm going to, if the ball's wide, I'll hit it here. And if it's straight, I'll hit it here. And if it's short, I'll play it like this. And he visualizes it. And it's a bit the same with Kohli. He has, through his own imagination from a very young age, kind of put himself into a position of thinking that this is where he wants to be. And he's probably thought about it more than most people ever will. And now he's got the talent and the determination and the skills and all those things to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Wasim Akram has talked a lot about visualizing how he'll get a batter out. I can tell you that personally, I've visualized myself being in certain situations within cricket's, media landscape, which has happened with me. So I don't know if there's anyone out there who's a dreamer, dream a bit more, put yourself in those situations in your head, because I personally think it works. But anyway, just to close off on Kohli the Chaser, right? He has been not out in a successful chase 18 times in T20Is for India, which is more than Dhoni. Right, Dhoni is thought of as the ultimate finisher, but Kohli has been not out more times, and he is a top order bat. So if you take that into consideration, it's even more wild. And he has scored 50 plus on 11 occasions out of these 18. India has never lost a T20 game when Kohli has been not out, and India's win-loss ratio is more than 4 when they are chasing a total and Virat Kohli is featuring in that game, whereas in his absence, it goes down to 2. Those are spectacular records to hold.
I think that was the number. I think Cheyenne or Varun found that, and I hadn't even thought to look at that. That's one of those things where it's great that we have a team working with us. It's one of those things where straight away I was like, oh, damn. Okay, that's the thing. And it's one of those, it's one of those things in analysis that really helps when you have a big enough sample size with and without a player. Yeah. That's just absolutely huge. And I think that says more than any other number about him chasing for me. They are twice as good chasing when he plays.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like when you look at Virat Kohli's overall legacy, forget T20Is, but even T20Is, people will remember him as Kohli the Chaser, the ultimate chaser.
Agree.
That's his brand. That's the sort of, image that he's built over the years, and it's spot on as well. The numbers back it. Anyway, let's talk about some of Kohli's great knocks and important ones as well in T20Is. I'll talk about the major tournament ones just to keep this interesting, and then you can tell me which one you thought was best. There is, of course, the 76 in the final in Barbados versus South Africa, the Schrodinger's Kohli knock. Then you have the unbeaten 72 of 44 versus South Africa once again in the semi-final of the 2014 T20 World Cup in Mirpur. and he scored a flawless 82 not out of 51 deliveries versus Australia in a must-win game in the 2016 T20 World Cup. I believe that that one was in Mohali. And then there's, of course, the knock versus Pakistan at the MCG in the 2022 T20 World Cup group stage, which, featured that six versus Haris Rauf, which is etched into cricket folklore, of course, back foot straight drive or whatever it was, straight slap of a hard length slow delivery, which I believe they did the math on, the probability of someone executing that shot to perfection, and it was like point something percent. So which one is it for you? Okay, let me make this more interesting, Jarrod. Tell me your favorite one, and then tell me which one you think was best.
It's interesting that you phrase it that way. Batting perfection was probably the Australia one. I don't think I've ever been in a ground where I felt like someone's more in control. He did exactly what he wanted to do. They had a plan that they thought was going to work to him, and he just was ready for it and just completely overdid it and overrode it, I should say. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant, the way he played there. The Pakistan one's probably the best innings, right? The pressure, the weirdness of the situation, the weirdness of the last over and everything else. That shot. I think also the Pakistan one, it's not as good an innings as the Australian one, because the Australian one, he was so in control. Whereas I think the Pakistan one, he probably did dig them into a bit of a hole himself. Right?
Yeah, you could put it that way.
From that situation, he actually then brought it back and won the game. So it's not as good in innings as the Australia game, but it's kind of better, if that makes sense, even if it's worse. It's easy to be at your best when you're just at your best. Do you know what I mean? When you're batting within yourself and you're batting on a cloud, that's batting perfection. Whereas the other innings is better because he wasn't at that level and then suddenly turned it on.
Yeah. Plus, scoring was really hard at the MCG. Like, that would be my pick. And I can tell you, I was watching that game with a bunch of Pakistan fans, right? And Pakistan should have won it, right? 45 runs required in 3 overs, and you don't expect to lose it from there. But there was this one common theme amongst those Pakistan fans that I was watching this game with, that they were absolutely awestruck by Virat Kohli. I was awestruck by Virat Kohli, and there was also almost like a sense of appreciation in which you were like, God damn, this guy is absolutely amazing, right? Which in a heated rivalry like that is not that common. Fans can tend to go into a bit of a phase where they erupt and they say all kinds of crap. But there was, lots of appreciation for Virat after that knock. So it's quite special to achieve that. And it's also quite interesting, Jarrod, that, during Kohli's worst stretch of form as an international cricketer, where he didn't score a ton for nearly 3 years in any format, right? Even then, he had a true average of 20 and true strike rate of 5 in T20Is. Now, ODIs are undoubtedly his best format, but he wasn't really good at ODIs in this period either, which means he's never really been bad in T20Is ever.
I remember, I can't remember who it was, but someone had hired me to do a big piece on him not making runs, and then it fell apart. But I'd started some of the research. And I remember looking at the T20 record and just being like, this is so interesting to me that it hasn't dipped off the way that everything else did. And I would argue he's a better test player and a better ODI player than he is a T20 player, right? And yet that was the one that he managed to keep. I just found that really fascinating. But I have no great answers for why it should be, because the wobble ball had taken over that format of cricket as well. Like, most opening bowlers by that point were bowling wobble balls. And yet, clearly in that format, it wasn't bothering him, and it was in the others. And I know it wasn't just that. The wickets in India was a big part of it. And he was probably... But also, other part of it was that he was putting too much into his life and he didn't have the energy and to put into his batting, and yet still he was making runs in T20. So I really do find that fascinating, but I have absolutely no answers for why that is the case.
He's even been quite vocal about how he took, a lot of mental stress and his mental health was in a bad place, yet T20 cricket, or T20Is at least, remained unimpacted, which is very, very fascinating. But let's talk about Virat Kohli's T20 batting pattern. Of course, this podcast would be incomplete if we do not talk about it. And so most recently and throughout most of his career, he has started quick. Then he's knocked it around in the middle overs, especially when wickets fall at the other end. He's always consolidating in that moment. And then he unleashes his wrath at the death. And for his time or era, this method would work. However, do you think it can continue to work in modern T20 cricket or modern day T20 cricket?
No, and I think he knew that as well. And we've seen him in his last 2 tournaments not play it. So he's worked it out. It's funny how, like we said before, he clapped back against the critics. This is what we've been criticizing, and he is now doing it. He is not clapping back against the critics. He's doing exactly what his critics asked him to do. I remember looking at, one of the first things I found in analytics was I looked at the best death batters. It was something I was really interested in. And remember, Smith and Kohli both had strike rates at that stage, whatever it was, the last 2 or 3 years I was looking at, maybe in 2016, 2017. They both had strike rates of like 2 runs a ball to death. And I'm sitting there going, well, if they can do that in the last 4 overs or the last 6 overs, why are they waiting that long?
That's true.
Right? And I understand it because that's the way they were trained. But that isn't the way that T20 cricket was going, through Maxwell and de Villiers and Dre Russ and, and Kyron Pollard and all these sorts of guys. It was going obviously in another direction. And yet they were still playing that way. And for me, it just felt like a lost opportunity, right? Most of the times when you're frustrated with a player, it's because they're really good. And for whatever reason, they're playing in the wrong way. And he could be more impactful. And I don't think in international cricket, he would necessarily have to do that. But in domestic cricket or in franchise cricket, it's like we said before, he wasn't playing as aggressively as he could have. And that was a factor. It's not the only factor. They've got a million factors why RCB haven't won, but it is a part of it. And this idea, the other thing I've noticed with him is specifically in T20 cricket, he kind of talks about himself as the partner at the other end, whether it be with Gale or with de Villiers or even as the Indian. He's the guy, don't worry, guys, you do what you do and I'll be at the other end. I'll be the consolidator. I'll be the anchor and everything else. Do you feel that way about him in one-day cricket or T20 or Test cricket?
No, not at all.
We feel like he's the alpha dog in that.
Yeah,
right?
He seems to be the accelerator in those particular formats.
And do we honestly think he couldn't score way quicker in the first 14 overs of T20 games? No one doesn't think he could, right? And I'm pretty sure if he scored really quickly, let's say he had a strike rate of 145 or 150, right? Let's say he got it that high. He would still average really good. He's not going to drop off his average. He's so good. So that was the issue that I think a lot of us had with the way he played. Now, I don't blame him. I blame the system of when T20 cricket came in, the coaches weren't good enough at getting the star players and Williamson. Root's probably the only one who was a little bit more, but Williamson, Smith and Kohli all played the same way.
Yeah.
Right? Different versions of it because they have different kinds of skills, but they all play the exact same way. And I'm sorry, if you are that talented, you have to play to the game as it is currently being played, not the way that you have learnt it, right? Yeah. And that's the issue that we have. It's because we know he could be this player.
I'm also confident that had he been born 10 years later, right now he would have cracked it, right? We saw evidence of that just now. So a lot of, a big reason why he played the way he played is because he was given those game plans and teams wanted him to be that anchor in T20s, which was probably not his best utilization because Virat Kohli is just that good. And Jarrod, we cannot deny the fact that him and Rohit batting sluggishly in Adelaide versus England in the 2022 T20 World Cup semi-final, it cost India, right? They weren't aggressive enough and they were knocking it around. And in the end, Pandya came and hit those sixes and took them to 170 odd. Otherwise, they had completely bottled it. However, Kohli bought into India's ultra-aggressive approach that followed after that semi-final loss, and he stuck to it even when the runs dried up. And that, in many ways, I feel, was the perfect moment to say goodbye as well, because he lifted the trophy after conquering his defensive demons, removing the fear of failure, and yet he delivered a throwback knock.
I think for me, and we've compared it quite a lot sort of internally to the Joe Root thing. So one thing I thought that Joe Root was great at is when it would have been very easy for Joe Root to bat like Joe Root did when Bazball started and just be like, I'm not involved. I don't need to get better. You guys need to get better. I'm just going to bat like Joe Root. you guys got rid of me as captain. You didn't want me anymore. I'm just going to make as many runs as I can and try and beat Sachin or get to 15,000 or whatever my target is. And instead, Joe Root went the other way. He probably went too far and got a little bit too much into baseball at times. But the point being is that in him engaging in this,
yes,
it was so important because it meant that all the younger players were like, wow, if Root's doing this, right? And even when Root failed and got abused in the press, he kept going, nope, this is the way we play now. This is what I'm going to do. That is what Virat did in this last World Cup.
Yep.
Right? Even in that World Cup final, I still thought he was trying to put some pressure back on. I think he probably slowed down a little bit, but I think he thought in his mind that Akshar's job was to go and his job was to stay in. And after the 8th or 9th over, Akshar had done his job and they had a long enough batting lineup that Virat and Akshar should have gone. So there's probably a little bit period there. And also, Akshar just couldn't get the ball away as much as maybe Virat thought he could. So there was a slight issue there, but I still felt that he was trying to put some pressure back on. Whereas there have been other innings where I've watched and I'm like, I mean, the one you're talking about in Adelaide is a perfect example of like England. Well, that's probably the one time when a team actually did go, we don't need to get him out.
Yeah. Also,
he's just not going to make enough runs here.
In that final, sure, he got his 50, I think, of 48 deliveries, if my memory serves me right. And the last 26 runs came off like 10. So I know catch-up knocks have to be judged with an ounce of salt. But once you do execute them and end up, as part of the winning team, they can be celebrated. And I feel like it was such a Kohli knock to sign off from T20 cricket. It really is fitting and poetic in that regard. And we've both established that, look, he would have retired a T20I legend even if he didn't lift that trophy in Barbados. But he did. And what I have utmost respect for Kohli is the fact that he was a player evolved. Forget the throwback knock. He had bought into the new philosophy, which is the reason why he had 75 runs in 7 innings, right? The moment he switched back onto his old ways, he scored more runs in 1 innings than he did in the entire tournament. And plus, one thing that we need to remember over here is that as a result of this trophy, Kohli has finished limited overs cricket. He has won each of the main 3 ICC trophies. And there are not many players who've done that. In fact, I feel like there's a podcast just on that because I can't think of too many on the top of my head.
Yeah, and he's just important to the beginning of T20 cricket because if you go back to ODI cricket, the big issue the ODI cricket really has is that fans are a bit not sure whether it's real cricket, and the players are very, very uniform in not thinking it's real cricket. So it actually takes a long time for ODI cricket to become a great format, right? It's really late 90s, early 2000s when it becomes a great format because everyone really takes it seriously. And you have a whole generation of cricketers coming in who take it seriously. Because of Kohli, right? And other players like him, but he's a huge part of this. It's kind of all T20 cricket has been taken seriously almost from the beginning. Not quite all the way back, but you know what I mean? Very early on.
Yeah.
And some of that is the money of franchise cricket, but a lot of it isn't. It's the fact that those stars like Joe Root and Virat Kohli both grew up as T20 players taking it seriously in a way that hadn't really happened before in ODI cricket when we had that changeover. Now,
very true.
There's a few different reasons beyond that, but with all due respect to Steve Smith, he has never taken T20 cricket anywhere near as seriously as Virat Kohli has. No one would argue that.
Yeah.
Right? Not to say that he doesn't try very hard when he's playing, but it's not his main thinking, right? His main thinking is, how do I make runs in Test cricket? Oh, now I'm in an ODI. I'll try and make runs in ODI. Now I'm in a T20. I'll try and make runs in T20. Whatever you want to say about Kohli, that has not been the case. The same with Root. England tried to move on from Root, and he kept going, no, guys, I'm still here. I still want to play. Right? He kept trying to find ways of making himself useful and available and actually worked on his bowling more and more so he could play in more T20 cricket if England needed him to, right? That's a really important thing because that is the sort of thing that has a bigger impact on it, and it is matured T20 cricket faster. The hilarious thing about that is, in maturing T20 cricket faster, it probably went away from the way that Kohli played it, right?
Yeah.
But he played a part in that. And I think he really does deserve a lot of respect for where T20 cricket is now. It matters to him.
Yeah.
Right? It matters to him in a way that it did not matter to, I don't know, a lot of great...
Ricky Ponting.
Well, Ricky Ponting's the first ODI player where one-day cricket starts to play. But that generation just before Ricky Ponting, players like David Gower, maybe even someone like Martin Crowe, that sort of level of player at that period, a lot of them just didn't take it all that seriously.
Yeah. I meant Ricky Ponting not taking T20 cricket seriously, because we have evidence for that.
So that's the hilarious thing about Ponting is Ponting, and I asked Ponting about this once, and I said, why did you take one-day cricket so seriously when others didn't? And he said, I didn't realize that it wasn't like the format to take seriously. I just thought it was another format I could be great in, and I love watching heroes in it, so I tried to do the same. And it wasn't until I started playing at the international level I realized other people didn't think the same way I did about it. But then it was too late. And I think Kohli starts playing with, Sachin and Rahul Dravid and these. There's no doubt none of them took T20 cricket seriously, right? They do a little bit more sometimes these days, but they didn't take it all that seriously at the time.
Yeah.
And Kohli did. But because he becomes Kohli, that means it's an important thing. And you need that buy-in. And the earlier you get the buy-in, the more important.
Absolutely. I mean, his legacy has been cemented now. There are no doubts after that title. But even without it, I feel like he is a massive part of where the game is at, the shortest format, real-time reality that we live in. So, just to close this off, we said that he completed limited overs cricket. Do you think he will end up completing cricket all over? Because he is eyeing that World Test Championship mace. He wants it. He wants it desperately.
India's good enough to do it. Look, a lot of it depends on, who they're playing at the time. And, they could have won either of those games. I think they were a good enough side to beat either of those sides. I know there's a lot of Indian fans who get upset that all the games have been in England. That's partially, if you want to be really honest, it's partially because England's the team that really wants to host it, and the other cricket nations around the world haven't really wanted to host it yet. But eventually it will be hosted in other places, and they might get a good game in the future, but maybe that'll be too late for Kohli. But there's every chance that they will do it. I don't think it really matters. I think India were a great test team under him. As far as I'm concerned, he's already completed test cricket for me. The one thing that I would like for him is I just think he had too many crap years in test cricket, and he's tarnished his test cricket reputation a little bit. And he was on the path to be a top 15 batter of all time, and that's dropped off. And he's too good to allow that, and he's too motivated. I just want him to play 2 or 3 years of great test cricket. Again, if for no other reason than I love watching him bat in test cricket. And so I want to see that happen again. And I, like a lot of people, just disappointed in the way that he's played over the last couple of years, just because he's so fantastic. And, I always said from the beginning, when it came to test cricket, everyone always said, who's your pick in the big four when they all sort of arrived? And I was like, Kohli. And it's disappointing to see what he has become when, again, it's a bit like the T20 thing. We know what he could do. So it would be great if he went back and had 3 more great years of averaging 50, 55 plus in test cricket now. And then who knows? He's fit enough and driven enough. And if his body stays together, maybe he's the sort of guy who can play into his late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, and I mean, India do look primed or have a good chance of making the World Test Championship final once again. He's played 2 already. Rahul Dravid, in his going away speech, gave him that blessing, and he said that go get that last one. I know Kohli wants that mace, and if anything, the one thing apart from him chasing totals and everything, which defines Virat Kohli, the cricketer, is the passion that he brings to the table and the way he competes. He's a terrific competitor, leaves everything out on the field, 120%. And that's why he is so terrific to watch for anyone who loves the sport. And T20 internationals will definitely miss him. So go well in retirement, Virat, if you're watching this.
And I'm sure he is. I think he watches all the shows.
Anyway, that wraps up this episode of Footmarks. Thank you to everyone, all of our viewers and listeners who stayed with us for the full 41 odd minutes. And just a quick reminder to all of you guys that you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage, which can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of our team, whether it be written content, podcasts, or videos. We'll be back perhaps in 2 weeks this time for another episode of Footmarks. We're not quite sure on that. Maybe there's another episode next week. Maybe there isn't. But we'll see you soon
just
enough.
on that, just for those who are listening, we are changing how the podcasts work. We will explain it when it happens, but we're getting away from the current system that we've been using for a while, which obviously worked very well for me and Behram, but we're just changing it up a little bit and making it different. It'll still be us talking, but maybe there will be shorter episodes. There might be more emergency episodes. It won't be that Uncovered comes out on one day and Wagon Wheel comes out. It'll just be a lot more flexible into the future.
It will be as haphazard as Jarrod's brain, and you guys will definitely be entertained. And so there's no guarantee that there will be a Footmarks next week. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But
there might be two some weeks as well.
Yeah,
we don't know. It's going to be random.
It's going to be very, very random. And we're excited to go into this next phase as part of our team at Good Areas. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. And we'll see you when we see you. Have a great week. Goodbye.